Product, a podcast sponsored by Mind the Product Training. Each session we will take questions from our larger product community, and hopefully we'll be able to provide you with new and helpful ways of thinking about the products that you are currently experiencing, provide you a couple of resources that you can go and chase down, and maybe opportunities and pathways for deeper learning that will take you hopefully to points where you can kind of grapple with those problems and challenges and overcome them. So please, if you appreciate the podcast and find it helpful, share it with your product community, and hopefully they'll find it helpful as well. So my name's Rosemary King. This is our inaugural mindset session. If I look a little bit nervous, I am, because this is my first time on camera. I sort of wish that this was simply a podcast-based session, but here we are. And I wanted to start every mindset session with something that I've been using on this week. As the director of training products for Mind the Product, I'm constantly looking into what's being talked about in our training community, in our product communities, and figuring out sort of, what's happening, what's the temperature of what's going on out there. And I noticed a series of tweets last week by a wonderful product thinker called Brendan Chu, who is the director of product at Shopify. He gave a wonderful talk at Mind the Product San Francisco this past July. And I think that he has a wonderful perspective on the role itself. The series of tweets was quite funny, and it was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it also rang very true for me. And Brendan was talking about how being a product manager is actually the worst job. And the series of tweets that he talked about the role being thankless. He talked about product managers constantly having to eat shit all the time. He talked about having constant anxiety for the public nature of the role. He talked about constantly having to prove your value to the organization and potentially to your team. And it really resonated with me because when I'm teaching our classes to participants at least once a session, I get a question and the answer is, a little bit unfortunate. Like, yeah, as a product manager, you kind of have a bit of a thankless task. I often joke I can't really imagine why anyone would want this job. I think the interesting thing about being a product manager is that when you do your job well, it's a little bit invisible, it's unfelt. You are smoothing pathways and making life easier for your organization and your team. And so people might not necessarily notice that their life is great, they just know it's great. When you don't do your job well, all of a sudden people start noticing friction or a lack of clarity. So the theme of this session is all of the questions that we've gotten in from the community are going to be about the unseen factors of the product manager role, how bringing people into the room and creating alignment are so valuable. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll understand that your role is incredibly valuable. While sometimes it is very difficult and you do feel like you're eating a lot of shit every day, if you don't do it, then your organization would be a lot worse off. So all of the questions are going to be talking about those aspects. The other part of the Mindset podcast is that we're going to be bringing amazing product thinkers on to grapple with questions. So I'm really excited to introduce our guest for today. Her name is Laurel Gray, and she is head of product at allplants. So welcome, Laurel. Come on over. Hi, Laurel.
Hi, how are you?
I'm really good. Thank you so much for joining us today. I just wanted to kind of give folks a chance to get to know you a little bit. What have you been up to recently at allplants?
Great question. I joined allplants in June, so it feels like the last 3 months have been 3 years. And the highlights for me have been buying whiteboards for allplants. So now we're leading meetings and having someone facilitate a whiteboard. It's actually helped our meetings go a lot faster.
Tell me why. So what is it about the whiteboard that kind of what are you pushing with that process?
I think one is democratization of information. A lot of meetings have the CEO in them, and so when he says something, making sure that we're writing on the whiteboard, it then removes the personality around the idea, personality from the idea, and it does the same thing for our heads of departments or directors or the people who are not heads or leads but are coming in as product managers or software developers, and that's been really helpful for democratizing those decisions a little bit more and making it a little bit more objective and less personal. It's very different when the CEO is talking directly to you versus when you are looking at the thing on the whiteboard and having a conversation around that.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that's been really helpful with is actually making sure everyone's on the same page. It's very easy for when you're having conversations, just like nodding along and like someone's saying something and they're like asserting an idea and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. But then when you write it out on the whiteboard, people are like, wait, that's not what I imagined at all.
Yeah. It's the visualization of the mental model.
Yeah.
Like basically making sure that there's that sense of shared understanding. And if you're just talking about it, you can really be actually talking about two different things. But if you get it on that whiteboard, you can come to that shared understanding, because there's no way that you can kind of continue without agreeing as to what's being portrayed. We've been thinking a lot about mental models at Mind the Product, because I've been working on a systems thinking mapping workshop, and it's all kind of predicated on the visualization of the mental model piece. And so the thing is that a lot of people think models have to be like these complicated algorithms, but actually it's simply taking a pen to paper or a marker to a whiteboard, and you can just kind of get going that way. So good for you for surrounding yourselves in whiteboards at allplants.
I've bought three.
The
giant ones. So
yes,
that's been the highlight recently.
That's awesome. So without further ado, we're going to get into the questions that we've received over the last couple of months. I'm so excited. So again, the theme is all about how sometimes the product manager role is a little bit thankless. And so a lot of the questions have to do around the creative, like, courage process of sometimes having to speak truth to power, of having to bring people into a room, of, you know, using process to create alignment. So without much further ado, let's get into the first question, shall we? So the first question we have is, what is the best way to establish psychological safety and encourage sharing amongst developers and the broader team? This question comes to us from Michelle. So we talk a lot about psychological safety in both of our, what we call our survey courses. So we've got Foundations and Essentials. And in the Foundations course, we have a module that's, you know, core team culture. And it really is predicated on psychological safety and how it's such an important kind of trait to develop in your team. And I think it really does fall on the product manager's shoulders to make sure that that is being developed. So what do you think, like, the foundational aspect of psychological safety is, like, that product managers can do to help cultivate that?
I think the first step is to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's really easy for us to go into meetings and be like, do people feel psychologically safe?
Yay!
And everyone's like, I guess so, but nobody really understands what it is or why it's an important thing. So talking about what it actually is and also why it's important, maybe also bringing up the Google study, I think it was Google, Aristotle,
that's right.
Project.
Yeah, so Google, for those of you who don't know, and you can Google this, Google has released it. You can Google the Google, Google the Google report. Project Aristotle was a study that Google did to understand the traits of their highest performing teams, and what they found was that it wasn't number of PhDs or, you know, amount of hard skills shared. It was actually whether or not the teams demonstrated characteristics of psychological safety. And so they go in depth into what those characteristics are, but basically in a nutshell, it's like, do people have the courage to disagree? Are ideas, sort of openly shared? Do people feel like they can fail and make mistakes without blame and recrimination? Is feedback offered on a regular basis?
Yeah.
And I actually think that that's one of the best ways, if you are looking to create psychological safety in your team and you need a mechanism to start that, I think a simple weekly retrospective can be a wonderful way of starting establishing and flexing that feedback muscle. And so, do you run retrospectives at allplants?
Yes, we do now.
How often do you?
Every week.
Now that you're there, you run them every week. So who comes?
We have all of the developers, the designer, and the product manager.
Yeah.
And me, which is really good.
Yeah.
And the head of engineering.
So how has that been going in terms of getting started with retrospectives at allplants?
Getting started was a little touch and go. I think the team hadn't been doing it together ever, except for when like things would go wrong, and then they do something more like a post-mortem, but it was maybe more like verbally hashing things out.
Yeah.
And then when I joined, we started doing weekly retros, and at first it was like, oh, this is going to take an hour away from the team. And I was like, you know what, like if it doesn't work out, we can let's treat it as an experiment.
Yeah.
And which is like, age-old consulting trick where you're like, okay, it's an experiment. If it doesn't work, we can always stop doing it. We don't have to do it forever. And then I think the big thing for me is I went on holiday and the team still had another retro without me.
Yay!
Which means they find it valuable, and we've been building a lot of like good muscles around like creating good action items out of it, which has helped us to move forward.
I think that's really one of the key assets that retrospectives help drive forward is a continuous improvement culture, which is a really important aspect of psychological safety, that people feel like there's hope for things to improve and that they actually see things that were creating friction get better. Because when you're on a team where you feel like nothing's going to change and you're always just going to have to eat shit, which apparently is like the general theme, then you stop trying and you stop caring. And I think when you have a team that doesn't care, you are not going to create a great product for your customer. So I think that's why retrospectives are so important. I actually have been told by several people that somebody needs to write a pamphlet on retrospectives, and I completely agree. I think they are one of the most valuable tools for any product development team to utilize generally. And it does take a long time to get good at giving that type of feedback. I think it's really important to, one, make sure you have an objective facilitator who can highlight both the positive and the tough aspects of the week, who is action item oriented, who can sort of pull out, okay, is there an action? What should we do next with that? And can also keep the team accountable to those things. I think the other important thing is make sure that folks understand that retrospectives need to be, again, a safe place, so that feedback needs to be given in a really impersonal way. So it's not, well, Jim didn't do X, Y, Z, and that's why like the build failed. It's, hey, it seems like we don't have enough checks in place before we, push to prod. So we obviously need to make sure that we've got at least a couple of eyeballs, and let's not ever push on a Friday afternoon in August kind of concept. So making sure that you're keeping all of the feedback that you give impersonal and really about the process, not about the people, I think.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, but psychological safety, there's so many different ways to establish psychological safety. I think retrospectives are great. Anytime as a product manager you can give real-time, in-the-moment feedback in a kind, actionable way is really helpful as well. And also ask for feedback a lot from your team. Like, how is this feeling? Is this working for you guys? How's everybody doing this week? Like, just these, like, making it a human process, but just having that be an ingrained part of every conversation that you have with folks that you're working with.
I love how the example questions you used didn't include the word feedback in them.
Yes.
I think it's kind of stripping the word feedback out of feedback and making it a much like smaller thing that is normal, and normalizing feedback, and it's not like this thing where we like sit across the table from each other and
hello.
Like, I have some feedback to give to you. Would you like it?
Oh, it's so heavy. I remember at a couple of jobs, every time I was pulled into a room to talk to somebody, I had this like sinking feeling of dread. And I think any time as a leader of a team or as a product manager, you can take that feeling away and just be like, it's okay for us to talk about how things are going. And I want you to tell me how things are going for you as much as I want to tell you how things are going for me or for the organization. It's bi-directional. And if folks feel safe to give you how they're feeling and to really honestly, authentically talk about that, that is a wonderful, I think, demonstration of psychological safety in action, for sure.
Brené Brown is a huge thought leader in this space too, where she's talking about how you enter rumble moments with your team and you're like, okay, we're going to rumble.
Yeah.
And that opens up the, almost like it is agreed that you're going to disagree, and that is okay. And I think we talk a lot about that even in the Mind Product Essentials course, where you're engaging with stakeholders and trying to build what's called credit with them.
Yes.
And part of that is like finding common ground, and then also being like, here are places where we don't disagree or don't agree. Can we agree that we don't agree here? And like, we don't have to agree, and that's okay.
And that's okay. Yeah, absolutely. Brené Brown, the book, for those who are listening, is called Rising Strong, and it's all about resiliency models. And I do think, product managers, we don't call them soft skills here at Mind the Product, we call them strategic skills. We have tactical skills and we have strategic skills. And I think strategic skills mean emotional intelligence, empathy, being able to connect with folks on, a human level. And so oftentimes a lot of the resources that we recommend to folks are actually not in the tech field, although we do have a lot of those as well. But I think Brene Brown, as a sociologist and as sort of an observer of human behavior and as a scientist of human behavior, her work has been incredible in terms of helping people understand how difficult it is to be vulnerable in professional settings, and how we do have to make sure that we're establishing safety for that to be possible, for sure. Grand. Well, I feel pretty good about the answer to that question. I hope that was helpful to Michelle. Should we get on to the next one? Okay, so the next question is from Andre. How to get a team of engineers aligned working towards one goal. So how to get a team of engineers aligned together towards one goal. So I think it's really interesting that it's a team of engineers in this circumstance, because I think a lot of times we forget that engineers do need to be brought into all of the, sort of discovery, design, thinking processes that help, I think, create a sense of shared understanding as to what the mission of a product is. And that's something that I talk a lot about when I'm teaching product managers. Is it's really, really important for product people, for designers, to remember to open the door to things like discovery periods, to things like user research, to make sure that you are baking in kind of debriefs and sharing sessions if the engineers really are not able to kind of take time away from their keyboards, poor things, and participate in user research, or at least observe 1 or 2 sessions, making sure that you, at the end of every round of user research, are scheduling a debrief session where you're saying, this is what we learned, this is the impact, this is how things are probably going to change down the line. But I have found that when I'm able to bring engineers into the discovery process, the value that they bring to the thinking process, how we can start getting ahead of potential technical friction, of how we can think more creatively about architecture, is just incredible. So I think it's incredibly valuable to make sure that engineers are allowed into the room. I don't know what your experience with that has been.
Yes, I think definitely it reminds me a lot of the Janice Fraser talk about balanced teams. And I think the thing that's indicative in this question is the team of engineers. I think part of changing the paradigm is also starting to open up the door and talk about like product management, product design, and product development or engineering to be one team. And so it's a product development team and aligning the product development team on one thing. I agree, bringing engineers into the discovery process is so helpful, because not only do they better understand the goals, the problems they're solving, and they have more empathy for the users, but also they have the technical know-how to know when they could, when it comes to solutioning, like what possible things exist out there that us product managers or product designers aren't even aware of. And they're also able to early on de-risk some of the riskier technical bits, like they might better understand some of the integrations that we'd have to get ahead of. So I find it incredibly invaluable. It's really hard to do and to make the case for pulling them out of the backlog and bringing them into the team, but it's incredibly valuable.
Again, and I think this is really an important aspect for bringing stakeholders into the user research process as well, and making sure that you have things like balancing prioritization sessions where you have both the stakeholder and the engineers represented, because if stakeholders are observing the value that engineers bring to these types of conversations, then they understand that actually that 30 minutes that they've spent away from not coding adds, thousands of dollars or pounds, whichever country you're in, of saved rework. And so I think it is really frustrating to me that you constantly do have to make the case for these people are not just code monkeys, that they're human beings, that they actually have really invaluable perspectives, and they should be part of conversations so that we can get ahead of those things. And I think as product managers, it doesn't necessarily have to be every single engineer on your team. Pick a rotating representative, and I think it is important to make sure it's rotating. So that everybody has an opportunity to understand what these processes look like from the inside out. But just insist, make sure that it's just one engineer, they're coming out. We need at least one representative so that we have eyes on the technical risk and the technical aspects of whatever it is we're discussing. I do think one aspect that is really important to raise up about the question, though, is how to align a team of engineers around a specific goal, you do need that goal in place. So, we're talking about discovery and user research as a way of helping, drive the why and bring people into that. But if you don't have an organization that has a clear sort of one metric that matters or clear goals for the year, for the quarter, it's very difficult to align any team around that. So I think the most important thing that you have to gut check yourself on, Andre, is do you feel like you do have a clear goal that's established for your product? And do you feel like hopefully your balanced autonomous team understands what that goal is and how it breaks down again into those product objectives and the key results that your product can drive? And again, an example of that would be potentially if your main business goal is increasing customer engagement, the product objectives are longer, or potentially more click-throughs, or longer time on the site, and then key results would be increased number of pages that one user could look at, or an increased amount of engagement with the content that you're presenting on your site. So again, as product manager, it is absolutely your role to make sure that you have clarified how that particular goal does break down and impact your product as well. So I think it's kind of twofold there.
Yeah, it's tough if you don't have the higher level business objective that everyone can drive towards that then helps you come up with your product level goals. You then have to do the work as the product person to then help the organization come up with what that goal is, which means you're doing all of this background, behind the scenes work to really do something that long term you need, but is kind of a pain in the ass in the meantime to come to.
Again, getting back to this theme of the product manager role being really, really difficult. It's not as simple as just walking to a room and asking your stakeholders, okay, what's our one goal? I mean, the number of our goals alignment module, which we teach in Foundations, is I think the most difficult module that we teach. But it is the most important because it's foundational. If you don't understand what your organization is attempting to achieve, it's going to be incredibly difficult for you to be able to get results. And so I think it's always really fascinating to me, again, talking about tactical versus strategic skills. The skills that a product manager needs around goals and goals alignment, goal setting are so important, and yet they are so ephemeral. Again, that background work, you usually have to go and do a sweep of all your stakeholders.
Like product debt that you have to pay down.
Product debt you have to pay down. You have to make sure that your stakeholders are aligned, that the prioritization on that particular goal is clear. And then half the time it's sort of like a struggle. It's like holding mercury to make sure that you maintain that, because somebody always kind of wants to sweep in and say this is the new hot shit. And so it is kind of a constant struggle to keep clarity on what the goals are and then how they break down to affect your team. So there's so many different things that lead into this question, but I think a strong, autonomous, balanced team where you can constantly bring in roles to all of these conversations are going to make your life a little bit easier.
Yes, absolutely.
So this question comes from Noah. My leadership has big ideas about what the product should do, but when I try to bring those ideas to users, feedback isn't great. It seems like there's a disconnect between what my leadership thinks users need and what I'm finding users need. How can I effectively surface findings from my user interviews with my leadership so that we're all on the same page? So a bit of a mouthful of a question, but so good. And I think this question resonates with me so strongly. I'm gonna let you start talking first because I'm just too excited.
Oh man. For me, when it comes to this is a very common problem, which is why we're laughing a lot.
Yeah, I know. So common.
And there's always going to be, in many organizations, you're going to run into this situation where there's a huge disconnect between leadership and their understanding of the users. And because you're helping drive user research and the lean experiments, you have a way better grasp on what users actually are asking for and what they need from the product.
And what their challenges are, where there's friction, where they're screaming, where you're seeing, you sort of hemorrhage users, or where people are really falling out of your funnel. So we have that all at our fingertips. And then you've got your, higher up stakeholder who's saying like, well, why do you need to talk to users? I can just tell you what you need to know, which is a direct quote from somebody who I used to work with. Why do you need to talk to users? I can just tell you what you need to know. And you're like,
I think it's all about that, like, and it's so funny because part of that is like stakeholder management, and you're trying to gain empathy for your leadership. In a lot of cases, they have a board who is telling them things, or they might know some market research that you don't, or they feel like they haven't clued you into something. But at the end of the day, it's you presenting your user research as evidence and anecdotes that then ladder up into actual data. So like, how might you, like one thing to think about is like, how might you turn the quotes that you have and the findings that you have into actual numbers?
Yes.
There's a big difference between like, oh, users seemed, like we did a round of user research and users seemed really confused by this middle bit in the shop flow, versus 4 out of 5 users that we interviewed ended up getting really confused at this point, and they all were confused, like 4 out of 4 of those were confused because of the way that this was worded, which then makes it much more tangible and actionable for our leadership to like better understand and have empathy.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I have found to be so common is when there is kind of a disagreement between user feedback and the leadership, is they say, well, you only talk to 4 people, so how can we possibly trust, like that's not quantitative, that's not statistically significant. And so I think what I've tried to do is exactly what you just do, 4 out of 5, but then also sort of say, look, you know, our early indications of research show that this is not, you know, landing well. So right now risk is incredibly high. We are going to continue to conduct research and test, and I can give you, you know, continuous sort of feedback on whether or not we start seeing the idea begin to resonate. And so the thing is if you can go from 4 out of 5 users to 9 out of 10 users to 15 out of 19 interviews, if 15 out of 19 interviews indicate that this feature is like completely falling flat with people, then that is a really solid indication that, again, not necessarily that it shouldn't be built ever, but that it shouldn't be built next. Or that there's something incredibly wrong with the implementation of said feature, or where it's placed, or like how it fits within the context of the service. So again, if you can get to the point where you're talking about how this is an ongoing process, and you can build that case with the qualitative interviews you're doing, that's really helpful. I think the other main thing that can be really, really powerful when you have a disagreement between leadership and the user feedback is get leadership listening as much as possible. Now, be very careful about how you do that, because one time I brought a stakeholder into the room and he just busted into every single interview and was like, yeah, but wouldn't you like it if the product did this? And you're like, oh, that's really not how you ask a question in a user interview. And the way that we ask questions in user interviews is very important. So that was a very leading question that put the poor user right on the spot.
I had a similar experience where we had a stakeholder yell at a user because they couldn't figure out how to do something on the page. Like, oh, there's no place where I could actually do that. And then the stakeholder busted in and was like, how could you not see like where it is on the page? I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. And I was like, oh my God.
That poor user, I can't don't scream at the person because they can't find something on your product. But that happens. So generally, if you have like a bit of a jumpy stakeholder or somebody who you don't necessarily trust to sit quietly in the back of the room and just observe, I have them listen on a one-way conference call phone where I dial them in, put them on mute.
Perfect.
And then they can hear. The other thing that you can also do is you can video. You can capture footage of the interviews, and sometimes you can even just splice the little snippets together, or you can kind of just like bump up to that particular minute that you want the stakeholder to see. That's not necessarily as tangible. I think it's really helpful for them to actually hear live what's going on. But if you can get the stakeholder listening kind of in front of the user research as much as possible. The other thing that I think is also really powerful is if you're doing research debriefs, line up every single quote, in quotes with the name, the age of the customer underneath of them, and just sort of be like, this is the crescendo of things that we have heard people say. I think the most important thing that you're trying to do is avoid an opinion fight with that leadership. And so if you can surface the interview, if you can really demonstrate that this isn't just, stuff that I'm gathering, it's not just my opinion, because sometimes if all of the research is hidden and you're walking into a room with your stakeholder and all of a sudden it sounds like your opinion versus their opinion.
Yeah, it's a huge issue.
It's a huge issue. And so you need to make sure that you are getting yourself out of the way and making sure that the user is front and center with your stakeholder as much as possible. So not an easy situation to be in. I think it's something, I can't believe 10 years down the line, like from when I started this job to now, it's like we're still having the same issue. I feel like it's going to be an evergreen issue potentially, but you know, it's kind of ego, isn't it? A little bit.
It's always a people problem.
It's always a people problem.
Yeah, it's absolutely ego. And also, I think for some stakeholders, it's a feeling of powerlessness, especially if they're not in the backlog, they don't get to say what comes next.
Yeah.
And they're just trying to be as helpful as possible. They're under a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
They want to like make huge strides, and they're like, oh, but why are you saying no? And like, how dare you say that just 3 people didn't think it was a good idea? Like, there's a million other people out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think part of it, is it's a people problem, and you need to have empathy for them, and then turn it around and make it really objective, like as objective as possible.
I think that's so important. Again, like establishing that stakeholder relationship, having that empathy, recognizing that, okay, this represents for them like a loss of control or a sense of, you know, powerlessness. And so again, I think bringing stakeholders into the user research conversation, like if you could have them listen to the user interview and then conduct the synthesis session with them and have them tease out those insights together and talk about the impact together, then hopefully it gives them a sense of ownership over that decision as well, which is why I think it's so important to, again, open that door. I actually have a talk about this that I did for Product Tank, because I ended up getting fired once from not bringing stakeholders effectively into the user research I was doing, and we ended up in 2 very different places, and they were just like, we're not going to agree. And I was like, okay, I've done everything I possibly can, that's fine. I feel like I've had some integrity with this. If it's what I really learned is that you have to bring stakeholders along with you in the process, because if you don't, then, and you end up in 2 very different places, then it's usually not going to go particularly well for you. The next question is from Lars. When you're a startup and you must meet revenue targets, how can you still advocate and convince stakeholders for making the current product more frustration-free and stable for existing users instead of just building out new features? So very connected to the last question that we just talked about. I think a lot of the, bringing stakeholders into the user research process, especially around frustration and challenges, is so important. But I also think this question really connects to, again, that previous question we had around goals breaking down into product objectives and key results, for sure. Because I think, what I'm hearing in this is that meet revenue targets. So it sounds like revenue is kind of the one metric that matters for this company. And so you, as a product manager, need a pretty solid grip on how increasing revenue breaks down into objectives for your product, and then what the measurable key results are for that. I don't know if you have anything else. What do you think?
We're not in, I'm trying to think of how to say it. So we're dealing with this a lot at allplants, but we're all kind of on the same page with it, where we know that there are issues in our current website and we'd like to solve them, huge issues. And then we also have some new features that we'd like to build, and our target is revenue. So I can empathize a lot with this question.
Amazing.
And in some cases, the new feature is more risky and also more likely to increase the revenue than us continuing to just iterate on these small changes within the website. And there's also an element of the whole thing might need to be redesigned. And so how do we prioritize that against some of the small changes that we'd like to do? And I think it comes down to if you align everything around revenue, then sometimes the new features will be higher priority, and sometimes they're going to be lower priority than fixing some of the current issues that you have within your website. You might find that the new feature actually might change the whole way you think about your entire website, which is the case for us right now, which is why we're launching something new, hopefully this week.
Exciting.
I know, but it might change the whole e-commerce flow, because we've essentially created a new trial box landing page that cuts out all of the middle bits and takes them directly to the checkout. And if that performs really well, it means that maybe we don't even need to fix the flow that we have currently. We could just kind of follow the same pattern that we've now built, which is completely different, and then redo the flow in that sense. So I think it's all about opportunity
isn't
cost.
it?
What's that?
Yeah, it's opportunity costs and trade-offs,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that you might potentially think about doing is if you can quantify the value of fixing some of the challenges and frustrations versus the potential value of the new features, and also include risk factors in that. Like, I think there is also like the risk of not getting something done.
Yes.
I think is one of our trainers, Uslam Youth, has an amazing workshop called, I can't remember, but it's on urgency, essentially, like the cost of not doing something, essentially, is the main theme, and I'm butchering this, Uslam, so I'm very sorry. But you can catch her workshop usually at our London conferences. It's an incredible workshop. And you do have to quantify that cost of not doing something against the cost of potentially doing something. And I think at allplants, it sounds like there's so much complexity in terms of some of those new features, in terms of how it could impact your future flows.
If it's successful.
Yeah. Exactly. Versus, making those incremental fixes. And I think that's the thing. Depending on where your product is, you might be in stasis, like you might be in steady state, and potentially all you need to think about is those tiny optimization tweaks that could, continue to see revenue increase, those decreasing frustrations. Or sometimes your product might be at a place where you haven't seen growth, or you're seeing stagnation, or you're seeing, a decline.
Yeah.
And you might actually need to be at a place where you actually just shake the whole tablecloth to see if that makes a difference in terms of how people react to your product. So it also kind of depends. I think you do need to take a holistic view and gut check as to where your whole product is, what's happening in its ecosystem, and as much as possible be able to quantify in numbers or in a dollar value the tweaks that you want to make versus like potential new features and the value that they add. I think one thing that you always have to watch is that even when you're testing new features, and this happened to me on an app I was building for a grocery store, we had this like really fancy sort of like shop by recipe feature, and it tested so well. Every single person was like, I would use this, absolutely, and like it could have been an incredible value add in terms of like increasing people's cart values.
Yeah.
Because it was just basically like add all ingredients from recipe, like done deal, people check out. And we were so excited about releasing it, but it was a huge feature to build. And when we released it, it just fell flat because people are creatures of habit. And while everyone says they want to shop by recipe, it's actually really not the behavior that they use in anger.
Yeah.
And so while it was an aspirational thing, like, oh my gosh, yes, I totally want to do this, I absolutely want to use this feature, ultimately it just, sometimes in user interviews, what people say versus what they actually do can be very, very different. So we tested the hell out of it. Usability was fine. People really liked the concept, and we were so excited about launching it. Ultimately, it didn't make a single difference in terms of like the actual product. Like usage was incredibly low, and we ended up having to kill that darling, which was heartbreaking for me, but the right decision for the product. And I think that that's always something to watch out for with those shiny new features as well. I don't know if that's something that's like a conversation that's happening at allplants.
I think the thing that I've been leaning a lot on is lean startup and like very basic lean startup. So there's this crazy revolutionary idea, not that a trial is revolutionary, but for our business it is, because it completely negates a lot of the things that we've been doing within our current e-commerce flow. And then I think the trick is giving yourself enough confidence from a usability and like user testing and low fidelity perspective to get to the point where you can build it, and then building it as fucking fast as you can, getting it out there so that like the absolute minimum, so you can see whether or not it actually has an impact. Because I think the danger with these fancy features from stakeholders in a lot of cases is that you end up building these things for 9 months at a time, and you don't see whether or not they actually land in production with users, and to the point where it like has a huge impact. So we've like limited our time to build to 2 weeks, which for me as a product manager, I'm like, okay, like 2 weeks, that's great. Like if it's a game changer, we've invested just the right amount of time to like get to a point where we put something that's not perfect out there. It doesn't need to be, But if it falls flat, we'll have only lost 2 weeks of development time.
I think that's so important. For that one particular feature, I think we were building it for about 4 months.
Oh, wow.
Because of how difficult the data sources were. And it
makes it so tricky.
Yeah, and again, I kept falling more and more and more in love with it. And we were testing it all through in like sort of, prototype world. So I was like, well, we're testing this, we're being responsible. But sometimes you really don't know until it lands in prod.
Yeah.
And so that's really the key. So I think that that's an amazing suggestion, is just try slicing for whatever new feature you're working with, versus like the trade-off of fixing frustrations or friction. Just make sure that you're getting that new feature out as fast as possible. Like, do not sit on it, for sure. Cool. So fun to hear about allplants and what's going on there. So exciting.
It's a fascinating place. We're hiring.
Cool. This question is from Michael. How can I manage my tasks and reduce distractions more efficiently?
There's a book I read about this recently, and I can't remember the name.
So I actually do have a book suggestion. It's called Managing Yourself by Peter Drucker. He's an amazing, I think, Harvard Business School professor. It's a very small book, and it was actually like mind-blowingly helpful for me. But it's very simple concepts. Our Mind the Product's COO, Annalisa Plan, basically read it, bought copies for every single person in the company. And we've actually all kind of been discussing it, but basically it's kind of like know yourself. It's like, and in a way that we don't necessarily think about, but we all learn and take in information differently. So there's a couple of different really simple characterizations that Peter Drucker helps you understand about yourself. So one of the things that I can't characterize necessarily the whole concepts, but I am a talker, and I am a writer. So basically, I'm a talker versus a reader. So, and that's how I learn. So basically, like if you were to send me, and this happens to me all the time, a really, really long list of, or long email with like lots of information in it, instead of reading it by myself, I would call you and I'd say, talk me through it.
Yeah.
And I would use that as an agenda for our conversation, because if I read it and then you were to be like yes or no to any of those things, I'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then the other thing is that I'm a writer in terms of like how I like process information, in that like I need to write stuff down. All I need to do is like take a note in a notebook, and then it's with me forever. Whereas if I don't write something down, I'll forget it immediately. And so I think in terms of like prioritizing tasks or working more efficiently, I think if you can understand how you best learn, how you best think, what you need to do to process information, and be able to work within those constraints. I think Peter Drucker has so many great examples of incredible leaders who force themselves into working in ways that didn't suit them, and making their lives so much more difficult for themselves. I think that's really interesting. So I would say start there. I don't know if you have, and then work within your own constraints. Like make sure that you're doing things that suit your own style, and don't look at somebody else and say, I have to work like them, which was definitely the bane of my early career as a PM, for sure, was me being like, well, that PM is doing like this exhaustive sort of like backlog audit every couple of days. I should probably be doing that. Or like that PM runs meetings like that, or this PM does this, this, and this, or this PM looks at like metrics every single day. And you're like, no, what you need to be doing is like taking a look at what people are doing and then asking yourself, like, does that work for me? I don't know if you have anything to add. What do you think?
I read a book recently called Make Time.
Ooh, cool.
I remembered the name. By Jake Knapp and the other guy who did Design Sprint with him. And it's wonderful. And I think the way that I ended up taking it on board is they have a practice where every day you think of the one big thing you need to get done that day.
Yes.
And like things will naturally come up and you're naturally going to get distracted, but like write it down and make sure that one big thing happens. And like for me as a product person, so much of I think my personal growth over the last year has been like recognizing that I'm never going to be able to do everything. And like as a PM, you're always taking on action items, you're always doing extra work for the team, and there's like more and more that comes onto your plate. And I think it's not a matter of you working more efficiently or getting more shit done, it's a matter of you being okay with not getting everything done and then trying to get the most important things done, because who cares if you like respond to this random email
Yeah.
on time or within like a certain week if the bigger issue that you need to solve you didn't have time to manage, or you like spent a whole bunch of time like actually solving a really big problem for your company that like moved the company forward. So I think for me, like, it's all about prioritization of those tasks and just being like, I'm not going to get everything done. It is okay. And then also, I think on top of that, there's a lot of like hacks you can do with Slack and email, which are natural distractions for us because we crave, it's like a dopamine hit every time you look at Slack or email for me.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I love like when I go and I look and it's like 65 like per my 8 channels, and you're like, oh my God, and that's not even counting email inbox.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that I've heard people talk about a lot is making sure that you are blocking off time in your calendar. And I know that sometimes people do that and then it just doesn't work. I actually had an instance with Laura, who's behind the camera, this past week where I've been setting expectations. I have to do a lot of writing right now, a lot of updating on some of our content. We've got a new workshop rolling out, and there's a lot of sort of deep thinking I need to be able to do. So what I've been trying to do is set the expectations. And this is actually something that could be really helpful for product managers, was when you set the expectations that, sorry, I'm going to be out for user research, or, you know, I'm going to be offline or for this amount of hours because I have to get this done, or I have to get that done, or I need to. So you have to, one, set the expectations and make sure that you give people plenty of time up front to sort of say, I'm going to need you for this, or I've got this question now. And then when you have that block of time, actually be very comfortable with being like, I'm really sorry, I can't talk to you right now, or just be comfortable with not being gettable in that period of time. Like in a very serious instance, like a loss of a limb, in which case maybe call an ambulance instead, call me. But occasionally you have to be comfortable with being like, I'm really sorry, I can't talk to you right now. And I think especially because PMs are we want to be open, we want to be helpful, we're here to serve, we are service roles in many respects. It can be really hard for us to say like, I'm sorry, not now. And the question that you have to ask people if they have come to get you after setting that expectation that you're going to be offline is like, is this mission critical? Like, if it is not, let's set a time for first thing Monday morning or first thing tomorrow, but I need this time. For sure. So I think making sure that you can manage your time and also stand up for your time is super important as well.
Great tips.
Any last thoughts?
I think that was great.
That's good?
Yeah.
All right, cool. I think that's, Laurel, I think we nailed it. High five, girl. Well done. I hope these answers were really helpful. We are going to be putting all of the books, resources, talks in the show notes. So when you check out this session on our website, you will find everything that Laurel and I discussed and recommended in those show notes. And hopefully those will be really, really helpful for you guys to go and check out as free resources. And if you have any other questions about any of the workshops that we also talked about, that Mind the Product gives, please feel free to email training@mindtheproduct.com, and we have a whole team of people who are able to help answer questions about whether or not those workshops would be helpful for you. So thank you so much. So on the theme of the product manager role being super difficult and not necessarily the most thankful job that anyone could have, I think it's very clear that it's a challenging role, but I think one that when it's working and you're doing it well for folks who are interested in solving problems, it can be so incredibly satisfying to help feel like you're making a difference.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Laurel.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it was so fun.